Well, Mark, you've written a piece that's on the ESPN site about the January transfer window and what the Premier League's Big Six might do. I know that the January window is notoriously tough to predict because it falls mid-season, but are you expecting it to be a busy month transfer-wise?
I do think it'll be busy. I think despite the fact that a lot of our big clubs spent a lot of money in the summer, Arsenal 250 million, Liverpool 450 million, there's still quite a bit of business to be done. So I think quite a lot of the clubs will be active in January. I think there could be some big deals. I think Man City are going to be active as well. So I do think it's going to be a busy window. I think there's some big players, Antoine Semenyo, maybe Elliot Anderson, possibly Kobbie Mainoo. There's going to be some big moves that could happen in January. So yeah, it could be an exciting window.
Well, let's start with Arsenal then. Obviously, the Premier League leaders. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the depth that they've got and the options that Mikel Arteta has. But do you think the position that they're in the Premier League, you know, the promise of a title to be won there in the second half of the season, do you think it may cause Arsenal to nip into the window and maybe just get that little extra something to push them over the edge?
Well, Arsenal don't have a lot of headroom. Certainly PSR, they kind of went to the limit in the summer. They brought a lot of players in, as we know, but it looks like, for me, they've got cover in every position. They've got two quality options everywhere. I think apart from in midfield where Martin Odegaard, obviously the captain, they haven't got anyone to kind of replace his creativity. And he's missed a few games this season. He's been absent for a while with a couple of shoulder injuries. And although Arsenal are still top of the league, they've got a 5-point gap. I think he's the one player that they could really miss towards the end of the season if he's not fit. So I don't think they're going to be busy in January. I think it's unlikely that they'll bring people in. But if there's an option they could find that would be maybe a loan, maybe a player that's got 6 months on his contract, or maybe a player overseas that, you know, fancies a Premier League challenge with the knowledge that he's not going to play every week, he's going to be a backup for Odegaard, then I think they could do something, but I think it's unlikely.
One of the names that you've mentioned, talking about Odegaard, and I know lots of this is speculative, but it's Kobbie Mainoo, possibly. Now, Mainoo is not playing at Man United. He clearly wants to play more because he wants to force his way into the England squad ahead of the World Cup. He's obviously not being used at Man United at the moment, but he is the type of player and the type of profile of player that might be good for some of the other top 6 clubs.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think at this stage Kobbie Mainoo will be an Arsenal player at the end of the January window, but in terms of options that are potentially available in January to fill that Odegaard hole, I think Kobbie Mainoo is one. And, you know, looking back to the Euros last year, he played really well with Declan Rice. He dovetailed fantastically with Rice. And that's the kind of player that he lacks at Man United. So Kobbie Mainoo's United career is really flatlined. And United, I think they will listen to offers for him once the African Nations is over, middle of January. So, listen, Kobbie Mainoo and an Arsenal shirt is unlikely, but I do think he's a player that would interest big clubs. Whether he'd be interested in going to a club where he might not play as regularly as he wants is another question. I think another option for Kobbie Mainoo could be Chelsea. We know that Chelsea like players who are young with potential, and he's only 20 years old, and I think people forget that Kobbie Mainoo was just a kid, and I think if he was 25 years old, you could probably understand his desperation to get away from United, but he's only 20, and I think maybe a bit more patience on his side. But I understand, you know, he's not playing. He doesn't seem to be an option for Ruben Amorim at all. It's Casemiro every week, and then, you know, more often than not, it's Manuel Ugarte who comes off the bench. So it's a difficult time for Kobbie Mainoo. United would prefer to keep him, I guess, but as we know, United are happy to let players go who are homegrown players. PSR situations, it happened with Garnacho in the summer to Chelsea. So I think Kobbie Mainoo will have an interesting window. I don't think he'll go to Arsenal, but I think he's a player that Arsenal could look at if they were getting to the end of the window and they did a short-term option to be a cover option for Martin Odegaard.
You mentioned Chelsea there, and Mainoo has been linked with Chelsea in the past. Obviously, it, you know, on paper looks like one of those sort of stereotypical Chelsea signings, a young player with a high ceiling who they could try and develop. Just on Chelsea in general, you know, they've kind of forced their way into the title race, you know, in the last couple of weeks. You know, whether you think that it's Chelsea or Man City as the closest challengers to Arsenal is probably a personal preference. But do you think Chelsea may look at this opportunity in the January window? I know they've signed an awful lot of players and spent an awful lot of money again, and look at it and think that they could maybe add 1 or 2 players to push them closer to Arsenal. And if Arsenal were to falter, they could be the team to capitalise on that.
I think so. You know, as we know, Chelsea have every window where they're one of the biggest spenders, or certainly active. And I think that they have got issues to address. Now, they are pretty overloaded with forwards, but I wouldn't rule out Chelsea moving for a forward. I mean, I wouldn't rule them out of the Antoine Semenyo situation. He's got a £65 million release clause at Bournemouth. And I don't think Chelsea are the front runners. I think you're looking at Man City and Liverpool, but Chelsea, no deal can be done, and they could get it done. They spent a lot of money on João Pedro and Liam Delap in the summer, but neither has really kind of done it in the Premier League this season. So who knows? But I think Chelsea's priorities are more, deeper in the team. I think, Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo are great double-acting midfield, but we know that discipline can be a problem there. We saw Moises Caicedo sent off against Arsenal. They haven't got a lot of cover there that's fit. Obviously, Romeo Lavia, cover, never fit. So, Mainu could fit in there, in terms of Chelsea. Defensively as well, I think they're short at centre-half, so Chelsea could be a team that could look at Marc Guéhi at Crystal Palace, out of contract in the summer. A deal could be done there. They need a centre-half, a commanding centre-half. I don't think they're going to win the league with Trevor Chalobah and other players that they've got there. I don't think they're strong enough. So, and goalkeeper as well. We know that in the summer they were very keen to sign Mike Maignan from AC Milan. That didn't happen, but he still hasn't signed his contract in Milan. He's got 6 months left to go. Again, Chelsea could do a deal there in terms of getting Maignan in on a relatively low fee. So Chelsea have got a lot of options in the window. I think they'll be busy.
Well, let's talk about Marc Guéhi's situation, because you mentioned him there. Obviously, at the end of the summer window, he was on the verge of joining Liverpool. It fell through. Palace said that they couldn't let him go without a replacement. He's still at Palace. He's kind of suggested privately that he's not going to sign a new deal, which means he can leave Selhurst Park on a free transfer at the end of this season. He's been linked heavily with Liverpool, Chelsea, a couple of clubs in Europe, Barcelona and Bayern Munich as well. Do you think there's a possibility that clubs could go to Palace in January and say, we'll give you 20 million now or 15 million pound now, you get a little bit of money, we get a player mid-season? Or do you think it's more likely that he stays, sees out his contract and leaves on a free at the end of the season?
Yeah, I definitely think clubs will try Palace's resolve. I think Liverpool obviously need him, but whether Liverpool's an attractive proposition now for Guéhi as it was in August, I'm not too sure, because they haven't got a lot of cover for Konaté and Van Dijk. If one gets injured, then you're playing all the time in a team that is struggling right now. So, I'm sure Liverpool will try, and I think they'll have to try early, because they have to try early enough so that Palace can get somebody in to replace him. I think Man City will be interested in Marc Guéhi. I'm pretty sure Chelsea will be as well. So they won't lack interest, and even the big clubs in Europe, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona, have all been linked with Marc Guéhi in recent months. But it depends on Guéhi wanting to go, and I think it suits Palace to let him go for the money. But I just think that Marc Guéhi seems to be content to run his contract down, exploit free agent status in the summer. And I think that's what Oliver Glasner would prefer, because obviously Glasner made it clear at the weekend that he was unhappy with the business done by Palace in the summer. If they let Marc Guéhi go, their best player basically in the window, they're going to have to replace him very quickly and very well. So we could see a bit of tension there at Palace if they let Marc Guéhi go. But ultimately, I don't think he will go. I think he'll stay and see his contract. He doesn't have to leave. They can accept an offer, but he doesn't have to go. So I think he'll stay, and I think he'll be one of the best free agents in the summer in terms of a deal for a big club to do.
So they're on to Liverpool then. Obviously, they were very close to signing Guéhi in the summer window. They clearly want or need a centre-half. If they're going to go back into the market in January, considering how much money they spent in the summer, do you see it being a centre-half that they target? Because there's also been links with another player you've mentioned earlier, Semenyo at Bournemouth.
Yeah, well, Liverpool, despite spending so much money this summer, £450 million, a massive spending spree, they're still quite clear on PSR. They've got quite a lot of headroom to do deals. They brought in about £250 million with players on the way out. So they made loads of money in terms of Premier League prize money, Champions League money last season. So Liverpool can get players in. Like I said, I think they will make another bid for Guéhi, but whether they'll get him or not is a different matter. And then, do they go for a second or third choice when their first choice is still likely to be available next summer? So it's a big question. Obviously, Ibrahim Konaté's had a terrible season and he's out of contract in the summer. So they may find a way to offload Konaté in January. But again, it's unlikely when players get to the final 6 months, they don't tend to leave unless there's a really good offer on the table. So Liverpool are going to find it difficult to get a centre-half in that will do what they want them to do. Semenyo's the interesting one because they're really keen on Semenyo. And obviously, Richard Hughes has that connection to Bournemouth, Liverpool sporting director, and it might help sway a deal. But, they brought a lot of forwards in. Can they afford to bring another forward in and kind of ask, Semenyo, Isak, Ekitike, Wirtz, Cody Gakpo, all these players, are they going to gel together? They've got Mo Salah coming out from the African nations mid-January as well. But the one advantage with Semenyo is that Ghana haven't qualified for the African nations. So he's a very attractive proposition to Liverpool and also to Man City, who are very keen as well.
On to City then. They've also been linked with Elliot Anderson and Semenyo. They're probably a bit light in the fullback areas, if anything, really. Do you expect City to go into the January market? Obviously, last January, they were the big spenders, pushing forward some of their summer business with, signing the likes of Marmoush and Nico Gonzalez to fill holes in the squad. Yeah,
I mean, City spent £360 million over 2 windows in 2025, so they've still got quite a bit of money to spend. They obviously had that Club World Cup win for in the summer, so City have got headroom to do deals. I mean, Nico O'Reilly's kind of stepped in at left back, so I think Pep seems to have found a bit of a solution there. But right back, yeah, they could look for another right back. But I think City's priorities to me are, it sounds like it's going to be a midfielder because, Rodri, he's struggling, isn't he? He's struggling to get back from his cruciate ligament injuries. I think he started, 4 games. So Elliot Anderson is a player they like. And I don't think Forest want to let Elliot Anderson go mid-season, but City are powerful. City have got the money to do it. City could easily say to Forest, there's £100 million for Elliot Anderson. They might not go that high, but I think they could do it because they've got the money there. They're able to get players in mid-season. And that would make it difficult for Forest. We know that Forest, fought tooth and nail to keep Morgan Gibbs White in the summer when he was going to go to Tottenham. But if they get offered a big bid for Elliot Anderson, City could offer it, and I think that would make it very hard for Forest to turn it down. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. But obviously, Semenyo is another one that they're quite keen on.
And so 2 more Big 6 clubs to hit. We'll start with Man United. We mentioned Mainu, the possibility that he could leave in January. I think Joshua Zirkzee is another one in a very similar situation to Mainu, hasn't played enough minutes, wants to go to the World Cup with Netherlands, probably needs game time to force his way back into that squad. In terms of incomings at United, I mean, I think it's pretty clear to anyone who watches United regularly that they need at least one top-level central midfielder. They also probably need another wing-back, if not someone to start every week, but someone to add some kind of depth and give Ruben Amorim some options in those positions. United, I think we've both written that United are approaching January in quite a cautious manner. They prefer to do their business in the summer, but are open to things happening if opportunities arise. Do you see United sticking to their long-term plan and maybe targeting players in the summer, or do you think there's a situation where something could come up mid-season in January to make United act?
Well, I know United want to see out their summer plan and wait, but if they get to January and they are, well, I mean, it's unlikely they're going to get to January and be so far adrift for the top 4 they can't qualify. So I think if they continue their kind of current rate of progress, which is top 6, 7, they're going to be with a chance of getting in the Champions League next season. So for me, it would make no sense for United to say, no, we're going to wait till the summer, because it could mean that if they spent £60 million, £70 million in January to get the player that would make all the difference, that could be the difference between qualifying for the Champions League and getting back to where United feel they belong and where United need to be, or missing out again. So I think they have to go for it. They have to find a way in January to bring somebody in. Now, they can do that by letting people go. As we know, I don't think anyone's going to go before the end of the African nations. But you look at, you mentioned there, Rob, you mentioned Mainu, you mentioned Zirkzee. I think Mainu will have potential options. United are convinced that if Joshua Zirkzee was to go back to Italy, after having come from Bologna, they would get their money back. I'm not convinced about that, because apart from the goal he scored at Sellers Park at the weekend, he doesn't really score many goals or create many goals. So, but he's still got a reputation in Italy where people are interested, like AC Milan and Napoli, both skirting around the edges there. Manuel Ugarte, again, could they get him off the books? Difficult considering how much money they spent for him. So Tyrone Malacia, another one, but again, they're not going to bring a lot of money in there. So United's going to find it difficult to raise money in the early part of the window. So they're going to have to find a way. But, the names that we know that they're interested in terms of midfield, they're looking at Elliot Anderson, but they're going to have big competition there from, I think from Man City for a start. You look at other players, Adam Wharton, will Palace let him go in January? Unlikely. Then you're looking around and you're thinking Carlos Baleba at Brighton. Tried that one in the summer, £100 million plus deal, no chance. Angelo Stiller at Stuttgart, he's a player that I guess is more affordable. I think you could get Stiller for around 40, 50 million pounds, and that is a deal that United could do. Whether he's Premier League ready, we don't know, but obviously sometimes you have to take a gamble. So I think United need to get something done. Whether they'll get it done or not, I don't know. I mean, obviously you hear as well from people at the club that their preference is to stay on their hands really until the summer. So do you think they're going to bring somebody in January? Do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible. I mean, the one message that we keep getting from Man United is that obviously it's very important that they sign the right players, but it's also just as important that they don't sign the wrong players. And there is this kind of worry that because of the nature of the January window, it is a seller's market. I think we all know that January lends itself to transfer mistakes, and that they wouldn't want to be in a situation where they've spent some of the money in January for whatever reason, that deal looks like it's not working out, and you get to the summer and maybe the money you've set aside for an Elliot Anderson or an Adam Wharton has been reduced because you've spent some of it in January. I do think it's interesting though, United kind of, obviously they set their aim at the start of the season to qualify for Europe, so that would mean Conference League, Europa League. they are in and around those Champions League places. And obviously playing in the Champions League is a massive boost compared to playing in just the Europa League. So it's whether United look at what is happening right now and the progress that we're kind of seeing with Ruben Amorim and his team, and think there is an opportunity this season because of, I don't know, maybe because it's Liverpool who have dropped out. City aren't particularly consistent. Chelsea aren't particularly consistent either. Spurs have dropped. There would seem to be an opportunity there to get into the top four. It's whether they decide that the opportunity is too great to turn down, and they want that extra one player to push them into the top four and maybe take a little bit of a risk. Because the one thing we heard, particularly in the summer, and again when we approach January, is that they are just risk averse now with transfers because they've made so many mistakes in the past. And it will be interesting to see what they do, because I think on one side you'll have the board, Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox, maybe sort of pushing for patience a little bit, but Ruben Amorim, because all managers do it, all managers want more options, and he will want ready-made players to come into his team right now and improve them for the second half of the season. So there will be, I'm not suggesting there's going to be any kind of breakdown in that relationship, but there will be two sides of that debate. Amorim on one side saying, I want players now, go and get them, and Wilcox and Barada and Sir Jim Radcliffe sort of saying, well, hang on, we've got this long-term plan, let's just kind of put our foot on the ball a little bit.
Yeah, I think United have got to pick up the pace. I think the long-term plan is fine and progress is being made, but you can basically stall your progress if you take too long. If you're too kind of cautious, you miss the opportunity to make rapid improvements. And I appreciate the money situation. They're in a catch 22 situation now. So the money isn't quite there, but the money will be there in the summer if they qualify for the Champions League, having taken a bit of a gamble in January. So I think that they risk their progress, their slow progress, being stalled completely if they don't make the right signings in January to kind of accelerate that process. You can't stick to the plan. It's that whole Mike Tyson line, isn't it? Everyone's got a plan till they get a punch on the nose. And I think United's punch on the nose this season is the fact that they've got a chance to get in the Champions League. So they have to change the plan and accelerate their acquisition strategy a little bit, and just to make sure that they're in with a chance of being where all the money is, and that's the Champions League. So yes, they're making progress, but they have to, like I said, up the pace to get where they want to be.
So one last one to touch on, Tottenham. We've seen progress or signs of progress at Man United. It seems like it's going the opposite way for Thomas Frank and Spurs. Lost again at the weekend to Fulham. Do you think that Spurs will go into the market in January? Do you think that Thomas Frank will be pushing for more players? Because out of all those top six managers, it appears like he's in the most need of just new faces, fresh blood in that squad.
It's a tricky one with Tottenham because they're in a bit of a weird situation because they brought a lot of players in over the years. You look at in recent windows, they brought a lot of forwards in. They brought in Kudos, they brought in Matthijs Tel, they brought in Colin Moani in the summer. But their attacking options aren't great. Solanke's not fit. Maddison and Kulusevski have been out for quite a long time. So do you spend more money on forwards to replace the ones you signed in the summer who aren't really pulling up any trees? Or do you wait for the likes of Maddison and Kulusevski to get fit, even though they might miss the majority of the season? So, they obviously need better players in all areas, but where do you start? I mean, there is a suggestion that Richarlison might be allowed to go. Everton quite keen on Richarlison, and that would open the door for maybe a move for Ivan Toney. Now, Ivan Toney, great record in the Premier League, knows Thomas Frank brilliantly because we worked at Brentford together. I think Ivan Toney would certainly improve Tottenham, but then Solanke's due back soon. So do they need Solanke and Ivan Toney? So I don't quite know where Spurs go, apart from obviously trying to upgrade every position that they've got. They have got a lot of players, and maybe it's more on Frank to find a way to get more out of these players because they can't keep going to the transfer market. And look, we know that the owners put £100 million into the club in October to help with the running costs of the club, but that money we've all been told is not for transfers. So they're going to have to find a way to kind of work the market a little bit. And that may involve offloading a player like Richarlison to create a little bit of money, but it's where you spend it because, like I say, they need all areas strengthening, but all areas have been strengthened in the not too recent past. So I think it's more on Frank really to get a way to find these players to make them better.
Well, you can read Marc's full piece on the January window and what the top six clubs might do in the transfer market on ESPN.com now. That's all we've got time for from the Football Reporters this week. Join us again next week.